I saw everything play out like a slow-motion nightmare. It's funny how the mind works in moments like that. I was being flung backward, tumbling through the air. I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure, then the ceiling, then my own feet, everything spinning together in a blur. The impact came hard, first with my upper back. Pain shot through me like a lightning bolt, followed by a sickening crunch. It was like something out of a horror movie. When I came to, my head was throbbing, and every inch of my torso screamed with pain. I had no clue where I was. For a few seconds, I just lay there, trying to piece things together. Slowly, I forced my eyes open. The first thing I saw was a harsh, fluorescent light fixture and some ceiling tiles. The brightness was too much, and I squeezed my eyes shut again. Breathing hurt like hell, each breath more agonizing than the last. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was lie there, trying to make sense of what happened. The first time I tried to move my head, I realized just how bad it was. Pain shot down my spine, sharp and unforgiving. Even the slightest movement was unbearable. I tried looking to the side without actually moving my head, but even that hurt. That's when I heard voices. Were they the ones who woke me? Is he going to pull through? One voice asked, full of concern. Yes, replied another, calmer voice. When do you think he'll wake up? The first voice asked again. He showed signs of coming to earlier, but slipped back into unconsciousness. We'll have to be patient, said the second voice, who I figured was the doctor. Considering what happened, he's lucky. The scan didn't show any bleeding in his brain, but there's some swelling. He's definitely got a concussion, so we need to watch for more swelling. His left arm's broken in a couple of places. The radius, ulna, and another break in the humerus. Judging by his back, it looks like he hit the stairs around his shoulder blades, and then slid the rest of the way down. His back is badly bruised. His jacket saved him from worse scrapes, but it's probably a good thing he leaned to his left. Otherwise, the weapon he had on him could have caused more serious injuries. He might have fractured his sacrum or hip if he hadn't. He ended up at the bottom of the stairs with his feet still on the steps. His head's pretty banged up too, with cuts and a lot of bleeding. But no stitches were needed. We cleaned it up and bandaged the wound. So, he basically surfed down the stairs on his back? The first voice asked in disbelief. How he managed not to tumble, I have no idea. It must have been 8 or 10 steps. I didn't count, but I'll need it for my report. So, no idea when he'll be able to talk? Asked the doctor. There was a brief pause. Are we checking out the woman? She was resisting, but I noticed blood on her fingers. I wanted to collect evidence before she could wash it away. The victim had 3 deep gouges on his right forearm. Can you tell if they were made from the hand to the elbow or the other way around? I closed my eyes, trying to stay calm. The monitor next to me was beeping steadily, not speeding up, which I hoped was a good sign. I heard someone pull back the curtain and start messing with the tape on my arm. From the hand to the elbow, for sure, the doctor replied, which doesn't make sense given the direction of his fall. It makes sense from another angle, said another voice. His right sleeve was pushed up to his elbow. I'll confirm it with forensics. Can I get a cup of coffee while I make some calls? Sue, could you get the officer a cup too? Better make it 2. His partner's here as well. The curtain closed again. So, what do you have? Asked a new voice from behind the curtain. The first voice summarized what the doctor had said. We've got both a man and a woman in custody downtown, said the second cop. Their stories match each other's but don't line up with what the witnesses said. Lucky we were close when the call came in. The responding officers barely beat us there, but they were able to check on the victim while we secured the scene. Yeah, the first voice replied. Did you see the video? Video? The second cop asked, surprised. A girl across the hall was showing her parents her new apartment when the shouting started. They caught it on camera, a man and woman on the landing, no clothes. The guy yelled, That'll teach you, you worthless piece of trash. They didn't see what happened next, but it was clear they had just finished fooling around, explained the first cop. Good thing witnesses saw who was there, said the second cop. One of them called 911. A young neighbor was next to the victim when the first unit arrived, pointing at the guy and shouting, He pushed him! Don't let him get away! The guy was already dressed and running down the stairs, while the woman stood at the top in a bathrobe, crying her eyes out. They both lied, saying they were just visiting when the victim lost his balance and fell, said the second cop. Both men laughed. I thought about what I'd heard. My brain was working again. Maybe I could turn this to my advantage. Would it be wrong to lie? He did push me down those stairs. I could have been killed. Let me go back 3 weeks. My wife Claire was in the shower and left her phone on the dresser. It buzzed. I glanced at it. Hey, sweetheart, I need some of that hot love. How about tomorrow afternoon? It was from her boss, Greg Sanders. This wasn't the first time I'd seen something off. A month ago, I found a text from him saying, "You looked amazing this morning. Can't wait for more soon." Claire brushed it off, claiming it was meant for his wife, Gina, whose contact was right next to hers. Greg even called, apologizing, saying he was trying to spice things up with his wife. Claire laughed it off, and so did I. We even made love that night, and I forgot about it, until now. But if Greg messed up again, why would he text his wife about tomorrow? I realized the truth. My wife was cheating on me. I thought our relationship was solid, but it was all a lie. Claire and I met in college just months before graduation. We were both business majors, often in the same classes, but never really interacted socially until then. I was your typical bookish guy, and Claire was the knockout everyone noticed. We clicked as soon as we got to know each other. I wasn't socially awkward, just not the athletic type you usually see with the popular girls. I stood about 5'8" and weighed 145 pounds. My sister and her friends would say I was good looking, but not a head turner. I remember joking about it once, and we all had a good laugh. One day, though, I overheard Claire telling my sister, "Your brother isn't someone who gets teased. He gives as good as he gets, and let me tell you, there's nothing he should be embarrassed about." That left my sister and her friends red-faced, but Claire wasn't shy at all. Claire wasn't looking for a wealthy guy, just someone who could get by. We weren't rich, but we managed. Claire's commissions from real estate covered her business expenses, and my job as a sales rep supported the both of us. After college, I continued my education to get a CPA and MBA, with the goal of starting my own firm. This meant long hours and frequent travel to handle distant accounts. Once I began suspecting Claire of cheating, I started paying closer attention. Greg Sanders, her boss, was in his 40s, married with 3 kids. Claire and I hadn't started our family yet, although we'd talked about her going off the pill to try for a baby. But now I was relieved we hadn't. I couldn't imagine raising a child with her now that I knew what was going on. That night I had planned for us to be together, but everything changed. Claire was in the shower, getting ready, expecting me to start things off as usual when she came out, looking and smelling great. But I couldn't bring myself to be interested. I faked feeling sick and locked myself in the bathroom. She went to bed and I stayed up late, researching how to spy on her phone. It turned out to be easier than I thought. I installed a spy app and started downloading her texts. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Greg, her boss, was a relentless flirt. They managed to sneak away together a couple of times a week, exchanging flirtatious messages and calls. I saved copies of one particularly graphic phone conversation. Not because I needed it to divorce Claire. I'd already made up my mind about that. But because I wanted undeniable proof she was cheating. "I'll come over to your place on Thursday while Robert's out of town," Greg said. "I love bending you over that couch and going at it hard." "Quit calling Robert a loser," Claire replied, sounding annoyed. "It's disrespectful." Greg just laughed and started to say something, but Claire cut him off. "Robert is just as big as you, if not bigger. You're just rougher. I love the intensity, which is why I keep coming back. Robert prefers making love, but sometimes I want it rough." "Yeah, you scream when I get going," Greg chuckled. "Gina used to love it too, but she says I'm too wild. She prefers being on top so she can control things. Your man can't keep up with me like I can." "Your jackhammer routine is exactly what I want a couple of times a week," Claire continued. "Making love is great, and Robert can be rough when he wants to, but he stops when I'm in pain. You don't. My insides are sore, but I love it. I'm in love with Robert, but sometimes I need those wild sessions. And if you call him a loser again, you won't get any this week. Oh, and wear a condom. Robert and I are planning to have a baby." "I hate protection," Greg groaned. "Ah, shit, well, it's that or no sex," Claire said firmly. "And if it breaks, I'm using a seed douche. I'm not risking getting pregnant with your kid." Greg laughed. Nice save. Claire laughed too, but then got serious. I can't take that chance. Besides, all babies look the same at first. Robert would be stuck raising your kid if his name was on the birth certificate. No, they don't, Claire said sternly. And he'd have a year to contest it. Plus, I'd come after you for child support. You really want to risk that? Screw that. Maybe I should get snipped, Greg said. Gina doesn't want more kids, and I don't want to give up the hot sex with you. Snipped or not, you can have all the fun you want, Claire said, ending the conversation. That recording might not hold up in court, since one party didn't know they were being recorded. But I didn't care. I needed proof of Claire's infidelity. She'd tried to paint me as the bad guy, claiming the affair was all in my head or just a one-time thing. But these last 3 weeks of gathering evidence had killed any love I had left for her. Once I was certain, I started planning my exit. First, I cleared our debts. My student loans were hefty, but I paid them off first. We'd been careful with credit card debt, our cars were paid off, and we had some savings for a house. I also began stashing cash, knowing I'd have to pay alimony, since Claire's real estate income wasn't much. I paid my lawyer up front, depleting our cash reserves, and diverted my paycheck to another account. I knew I'd have to give Claire her half, but I wasn't about to let her take more than that. I hired an attorney and got the divorce papers ready. Once she was served, all hell would break loose. Back to the day everything fell apart. I was supposed to be out of town, but I had a coworker cover for me, so I could deal with these personal issues. I considered different scenarios. Maybe I'd pretend to be shocked finding them together, or scare Greg off with my pistol. But that would likely end with me behind bars. All my friends knew I had a concealed carry permit and often carried a pistol when I traveled. I wasn't about to fight Greg. He was at least 6'2" and 230 pounds, always bragging about his college football days. That whole fight like a man nonsense wasn't going to work. David used a slingshot against Goliath, and I wished I were as clever as David. But all my plans vanished in an instant. When I unlocked the door to my apartment, I immediately noticed Greg's car parked right next to Claire's. I slipped inside quietly, making sure my keys didn't jingle. Their grunts and groans masked any noise I made. "Do it harder! Give it to me!" Claire's words struck me like a hammer. She was bent over the couch, and Greg was pounding away at her like a machine. For a second, I considered kicking him, but his legs were too close. Instead, I swung my fist into his side, knocking him off balance and off her. "You psycho!" Greg shouted, realizing what had just happened. He quickly grabbed me by the lapels of my suit coat. I tried to punch him again and reach for my pistol, but my coat was too restrictive. He shook me violently, and my kicks barely fazed him. Claire, meanwhile, turned and grabbed my right arm, stopping me from pulling out my weapon. Her nails dug into my skin, leaving 3 deep gouges. Greg half lifted me off the ground, charged across the living room, and hurled me out the door. I tumbled down the stairs, hearing a sickening crunch as I hit the ground. Lying there, I could still hear the cops talking as I started to piece together a plan. I let out a loud moan, signaling I was awake. The doctor came over to check on me, concluding that I was mostly intact, but needed to limit my movements. The police asked me for my account of what happened. I told them almost everything, including how I walked in on Greg and Claire in the middle of the act. I added that Greg had threatened to kill me and called me a loser. Claire, knowing I had a weapon, urged him to act fast. Greg then threw me down the stairs, and that's all I remembered. I didn't feel bad about bending the truth. Screw both of them. I just hoped there wasn't any evidence to contradict my story. Forensics backed up most of what I said. Greg claimed he was only defending himself from my attack and said he was visiting Claire because she was feeling down, and I had misunderstood the situation. Claire said that Greg pushed me hard and that she grabbed my arm to stop me from hitting him, which explained the scratches. Investigators found Greg's fluids on my pants, proving how close we had been. Smears of his fluids and other biological evidence on my right leg suggested I had kicked him in the groin. This showed I was facing him, not running away. Greg wasn't charged with attempted murder, but he was booked for assault. He posted bail, which set him back $5,000. I wondered if he thought it was worth it. It took a while before I learned the full story. My brothers didn't tell me everything until the doctor confirmed I was out of danger. They wanted to keep me calm. Shortly after giving my statement to the police, I passed out. It felt like no time had passed when I woke up in a dimly lit room. My thoughts immediately went back to my conversation with the cops. I decided how I would handle things if I ever saw Claire and Greg again. They were cheaters who had wanted me dead, and I'd treat them accordingly. Just before I passed out, I had planned to shoot Greg if he ever came near me again, claiming I thought he was coming to finish the job. As I lay there, a nurse entered the room, and then I saw Claire. I yelled, "Get her out of here! She tried to kill me! Get her out!" My brother rushed in as Claire, shocked and in tears, protested, "I didn't hurt you! I love you!" "You helped him throw me down the stairs!" I yelled back. They quickly ushered Claire out, despite her continued protests. I did want to talk to her, to hear her explain why she sought out rough sex with Greg instead of talking to me. If she had wanted rough play, I would have been more than willing to try. But I couldn't forgive her for cheating. The doctors kept me in the hospital for a week due to the concussion and concerns about potential brain swelling. My brothers visited regularly and camped out in my room during the first couple of days. They could hardly believe what I told them about Claire. I whispered to John that I had exaggerated her role in trying to kill me. John looked puzzled. "Why would you do that?" "I can always back off later," I said. "For now, I want her to suffer. She cheated and destroyed our marriage. Tell Dave I'm paranoid about being recorded, so I won't say more here." John chuckled. "You're something else." The day I was discharged from the hospital, I told John how I had bugged Claire's phone. "Tell her I'm hurt and angry, but that we'll talk when I'm ready." John grinned. "Give her a little hope, like she gave you before crushing it." I was furious, but a part of me still loved her, which only made the pain worse. The day after I woke up, Gina, Greg's wife, came to see me. She had heard bits and pieces of what happened since the charges weren't fully publicized. Gina sat down, looking concerned. "Why was Greg arrested for assaulting you?" she asked. Greg had fed her the same lie he told the police, that he was just visiting Claire, and that I had jumped to conclusions, leading to a scuffle where I fell down the stairs. He claimed he was innocent, probably hoping the neighbors wouldn't be questioned or that the video evidence wouldn't surface. "They were having sex when I walked in," I told Gina. Gina nodded. "Greg said you accused him of having an affair, but that it was all innocent. I'm not buying it. Do you have proof?" "I have a prenup," Gina sighed. "I get 70% of our assets if he cheats, and I can prove it. I plan to sue him after the criminal trial. You should contact a lawyer and file for divorce to lock down your assets so he can't use them for his defense. I've got an audio recording of their affair, copies of text messages, and a video of them naked on the landing after he threw me down the stairs," I said. "My clothes might have more evidence, too." Gina looked stunned. "You have all that?" I nodded. I knew Greg liked rough sex, and that convinced her. "I have everything," Gina said, standing up with new determination. "I'm going to see my lawyer. Please help me get the rest of that evidence as soon as you can." "I will," I assured her. Greg and Claire had no idea how much evidence I had against them, and they were sticking to their lies when talking to the cops. I might have overreacted, but Greg is probably trying to do some damage control, maybe even hiding assets. At least what he forfeits to the bail bondsman will come out of his share. Gina hugged me before leaving, wishing me well. I had met her at some of Greg's parties. She was kind and didn't deserve the disaster that was about to hit her, just like I didn't deserve it either. The day after I left the hospital, I retreated to my family's lakeside cabin, planning to take medical leave and use up my vacation days. My boss was aware of the situation and was arranging for me to work remotely while I recovered so I could still get paid. As I sat there, I couldn't help but think about how I had managed to turn their betrayal into a crime. Greg hadn't pushed me down the stairs because I was clumsy. He did it out of fear that I'd shoot him before he could get his pants on. But I didn't care. I wanted to hit him where it hurt the most. That morning, I canceled our joint credit card, leaving Claire with her half of the remaining balance, which wasn't much. I had waited to make sure I didn't tip my hand too early. Now, I wouldn't give Claire a single penny until the court ordered me to. The rent and utilities were paid, but she wouldn't get a cent more from me. Gina moved quickly, taking her 70% of their available cash and locking down their investment accounts. I needed answers. I called Claire and told her where I was. She had been begging my brothers to let her speak to me while I was in the hospital. I told her to come alone. If she brought Greg, I'd assume he was coming after me and I'd act accordingly. I wanted that on record to deter any further attempts on my life. Our meeting was emotional. I still loved Claire, but not as much as before. She claimed to love me, but clearly not enough to stay faithful. I'm glad you let me come talk, she said, parking the car. You know I wasn't trying to help Greg kill you. I shrugged and invited her inside, pretending to feel weak and asking her to grab us some drinks. She knew the cabin well. While she fetched some beers from the fridge, I discreetly set up video recordings, focused on the chair where she'd sit. Wondering if you're trying to get me to say something on tape, I started. She assured me she wasn't. My phone's in my purse, she said, then stripped completely naked to prove she wasn't hiding anything. Want to do a cavity search? She teased, swaying her hips suggestively. She was smiling, thinking this was some sort of kinky game. Maybe I would have been interested if she hadn't been screwing her boss. You might want to get dressed while we talk, I said flatly. Screw that, she replied. I'll stay naked. Just give me a towel so I don't leave a snail trail on the chair. Are you sure you don't want to check if I'm hiding a recorder? Take your time feeling around. She wasn't being sarcastic. She genuinely wanted to play. She knew the effect she had on me and was trying to use it to her advantage. She definitely had an agenda. Where do you want to start? She asked. Let's start with why, I said, trying to keep my anger in check. Not why you cheated, but why you helped that idiot try to kill me. I wasn't trying to help him, Claire said, tears welling up. I was trying to protect myself. I had no idea he'd push you. I just wanted to stop you from shooting him. Even when he shoved you out the door, I thought he'd just close it so we could get dressed and deal with everything. But then he threw me down the stairs, I finished for her. She nodded, looking horrified and guilty. I was terrified you were dead. He pushed you so hard, you flew through the air. When I saw you lying there, not moving, I was scared out of my mind. You didn't even check on me, I said, voice cold. The police said Cheryl, the neighbor from next door, was kneeling by me while you stood on the landing in a robe, crying. You went back inside, Greg got dressed, and then you both made up a story about how I misunderstood the situation and attacked him. No mention of me catching you two in the act. I didn't describe it that way, Claire admitted after a pause. How do you think I know what you said? I asked. The cops interrogated me. They heard two people tell one story, and I told another, while suffering from a head injury. They wanted to make sure I hadn't misinterpreted things. Greg was charged with assault, not attempted murder. Why did you lie for him? I was scared, Claire said, starting to cry again. Greg told me that if you had a head injury, you might not remember anything. We made up a quick story. He thought he could get away with it. You were willing to go that far to cover for him? I asked, disbelief in my voice. He said he'd make it up to me. If the truth came out, he'd lose everything and we'd both end up in jail, Claire sobbed. If you survived, it would be your word against ours. We had to keep up the lie, even after we knew you'd be okay. Greg kept saying maybe you'd have amnesia. You're worried about his prenup with Gina, aren't you? I said. I already told her what I saw. She needs proof to invoke it. My word isn't enough, Claire admitted. Greg asked me to tell you he'll pay you $50,000, $25,000 each if you change your story about him, pushing you and us having sex. We can use it for counseling. I'll quit my job, and we can get back together. I hadn't expected such nonsense. You think I'd cover for him? I spat. Plus, his wife would know if he moved that kind of money. He can't buy a candy bar without her knowing. He's been hiding money in an offshore account for years, Claire said. He's been putting money in a royal bank account in the Cayman Islands under his oldest son's name. He'll give us some if you change your story. Please, Robert, we can have a nest egg and get back to where we were. Greg means nothing to me. You're who I want. I want a family with you, she pleaded. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. Do you realize how ridiculous your plan sounds? Even if I lied and said I was confused, do you honestly think Greg would hand over any money? He'd just laugh at how he tricked me again, making me look like a fool twice. He's already manipulated you, and now you want me to become an even bigger idiot by changing my story. He'd never tell you about hiding money. He's counting on you being gullible, and he probably thinks I am too. If there's any truth to it, he'd keep that secret buried. Claire seemed to ponder my words for a moment, then stubbornly shook her head. I'm sure we can trust him, she insisted. But before I even consider anything, I need proof. I want to see a bank transfer with all the details, routing numbers, account information, proving the account exists. Then maybe I'll think about letting him off for $100,000. Fine, I said, shifting gears. Let's talk about the real issue. Why did you let that guy into your life in the first place? What did I do to deserve this? Was I not enough for you anymore? She started to tear up. How long have you known? When did you figure it out? I remained silent, just shaking my head. You didn't do anything wrong, she continued, her voice cracking. We had a solid marriage and a great sex life. At least until you got that stomach bug and things slowed down. Oh, God, she whispered, her voice breaking. That's when you found out, isn't it? Tears welled up in her eyes as she sat there, suddenly self-conscious and reaching for her clothes. All right, I said, breaking the silence. When did it all start? About 3 months ago, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. At first, it wasn't even about sex. We didn't do anything physical. I'm not sure why it started. We didn't have any real problems. Greg was always flirting, but I never took him seriously. Then one day, he started complaining about how miserable he was at home. Like an idiot, I listened. He missed the wild, rough sex he used to have. That night, I pounced on you in bed. We had incredible sex, but I didn't tell you why. That memory has haunted me. It almost gets me off just thinking about it. Claire paused, gauging my reaction, but I stayed silent, my fists clenched. She continued, I wanted that rush again. The thrill of something carnal. That weekend, we couldn't keep our hands off each other. The following week, Greg and I talked, and I told him about our wild weekend. He hinted that he could give me that kind of thrill any time. At first, I laughed it off, but eventually I gave in. I wanted to see if he could deliver. I craved that intense, primal sex. Finally, I let him try, and that was my mistake. Greg doesn't make love. He just takes what he wants. I didn't kiss him, didn't even really participate. I just let him do what he wanted. It was intense, almost like an out-of-body experience. I loved you, but with him, I could disconnect from reality. Something I couldn't do with someone I actually cared about. Remember that night you got that message from him? About how great you looked and how he wanted you? I asked, my voice cold. Claire nodded. You covered it up pretty well. If you had stopped seeing him then, I might have never known. She flinched at my words. I hate that word, she muttered. But you loved the thrill of it, I countered. You loved cheating on me because you kept doing it, despite the risks. She shook her head, trying to deny it, but I wasn't buying it. Well, I hope you enjoyed yourself, I said quietly. Get dressed and leave. We're done here. She looked at me, shocked. Can't you forgive me? Take me back? I'll do anything. Just don't send me away, she pleaded. I'm begging you. Let's start over. You can have me any way you want. Just don't leave me. I handed her the discarded clothes. There's nothing left to forgive. You chose him over us, I said, my voice void of emotion. Without another word, she dressed, grabbed her shoes and purse, and walked out. At the door, she paused, hoping I'd call her back. I'm so sorry, Robert, she whispered before getting into her car and driving away. I turned off the hidden cameras and made copies of the footage, sending the files to cloud storage for safekeeping. Then, I called Sergeant Miller. This is Robert LeBlanc. I've got something on video that you might want to see. As I was making copies, my phone buzzed with a call from Claire. I'm just leaving Robert's place, she said. He remembers everything, every single detail. I'm so glad you didn't come. He was ready to shoot you. Recording the conversation was a huge mistake. He caught on immediately. I even stripped naked to prove I wasn't wired. He's that angry. I even begged him to take me back to bed. Now, what an idiot, Greg scoffed. He's a total loser. Too weak to even get revenge in the bedroom. Good thing he doesn't have any proof we're sleeping together. His claims are worthless. We're still screwing, Claire corrected him. Yeah, but we need to cool it for a while, Greg said, his tone more serious. My wife's watching me like a hawk. She needs solid proof for the prenup. If I can secure a 50-50 split and dodge alimony, I'll still have the brokerage. I can't live on what little I'd have left if Robert divorces me, Claire admitted. even with alimony. I hope he comes around. I'm willing to do anything. Counseling, a post-nup, whatever it takes. Why waste your time with that loser? Greg sneered. I'll send some work your way to keep you afloat, but we need to lay low. No sex for now, at least until I'm clear of these charges. What did he say about the money? Greg asked. He refused, Claire replied. He might consider it for $100,000, but he'd need to see the transfer first. He thinks you're lying about the account and wouldn't pay up anyway. Well, he's probably right, Greg chuckled. If he switched his story and came asking for cash, I might just spit in his face. Maybe give him $25,000 as a tease, then accuse him of blackmail if he asks for more. For $100,000, I could have him dealt with for less. If you ever say that again, I'll go straight to the police, Claire warned, her voice deadly serious. I'll make a video confession and hand it over to the authorities. If anything happens to Robert, you're finished. Hey, I was just joking. Greg backpedaled quickly, his bravado fading. I was just venting. I'd never actually do it, Greg said, backpedaling quickly. But I doubted Claire believed him. I stayed on high alert, recording every word of that conversation. Sergeant Miller arrived at the cabin since it was close by. I wondered if Greg really did have a secret account. But why would he tell anyone? Maybe he let it slip to Claire without thinking, just like he did when he talked about having me taken care of. Miller was impressed with the video I captured during my talk with Claire, though he made no comment about her appearance. He took it straight to the assistant district attorney handling the case. This is just what we needed, the ADA said. We've got the forensic results back. There were traces of semen on your pants and a smear of other fluids on your leg. We'll compare the DNA before the trial. We also found matching stains on the couch and carpet, even a few by the door. It supports your story. We might elevate the charges against Greg to attempted murder. Claire might face charges too. Your skin and blood were under her fingernails, so she definitely grabbed you. Her claim that she was trying to stop you from pulling your gun could go either way. I asked Miller if I had the right to defend myself. He explained, a good lawyer could argue either side. Greg didn't hit you, but he's a big guy who could have. He'll deny ever threatening you. It's all up to the jury. Since you didn't actually shoot him, it doesn't matter much, but don't be surprised if his lawyer tries something drastic. That evening, my father-in-law called. He'd heard I'd been hurt, but was now out of the hospital. We were on a cruise, just got back and turned on our phones. We had messages saying you were in bad shape, maybe dying, then that you were okay, and finally, that you'd been discharged. Are you all right? Bill, those messages don't even begin to cover it, I replied. I liked him and his wife. They were good people. I didn't fall. I was pushed. Claire's boss tried to kill me. I caught them having sex in my own living room. It's a nightmare. I heard him relay this to my mother-in-law, who cried out in shock. You need to talk to Claire and hear her side, he urged. I sighed. I'm not at home, I said, and we ended the call. The next morning, I checked in with my attorney about the divorce papers. They were ready, but we needed to locate Claire. The process server had already checked her real estate office in our apartment, but she wasn't at either place. Then, Sergeant Miller called to say they had arrested Greg and Claire at work. He took the audio and video files to the assistant DA, who filed all the charges. The assistant DA wanted to meet with me, and Miller cautioned me about discussing the bribe Greg had offered to change my story. It could be seen as you being open to it if the price was right, he warned. I assured him, Greg doesn't have enough money to buy me off. I only wanted the bank information to pass on to Gina Sanders. I already called her, and her lawyer's looking into it. Miller had me write a statement to clarify my intentions. This is just to ensure we leave the investigation to others. We can't use illegally obtained information. It's called fruit of the poisonous tree. But your video is legal because you're in it. Greg was charged with attempted murder, and Claire was charged as an accomplice. The DA didn't think assault charges would stick against her, but didn't want her walking away scot-free. With the accomplice charge, she could face a $500 fine and up to 5 years in jail. I thought that was absurd, but Miller just laughed. The law is funny like that sometimes. Greg's likely going down hard. The DA is thinking about being lenient on Claire if she testifies against him. It wasn't much satisfaction, but at least Claire wouldn't get off completely. Despite everything, I didn't want her to suffer too much. I called my lawyer to let him know where she was being held, so she'd be served as soon as she was released. My brother John accompanied me to our apartment to collect the rest of my belongings. I only wanted my clothes, my desktop computer, and a few guns I had locked in the safe. Everything else would just remind me too much of Claire and the life we had built together. We were nearly done packing the last few items when Sandy, Claire's mother, showed up. We were stacking boxes on the landing when she hugged me tightly. "I can't believe my daughter threw away what she had for some fling," she cried. "Do you think there's any way you two could work this out?" Before I could answer, she continued, "I'm not saying you should forgive her right away, but maybe after some time with counseling." Just before Bill and I left for our cruise, Claire mentioned you were planning to start a family. We were so excited. I looked at Rachel, Claire's 22-year-old sister, who had come with her mother to pick up some of Claire's things. She was shaking her head, clearly disapproving. "I can't tell you how much this tears me up," I confessed. "I have video and audio that show just how bad things were. Claire doesn't know I have any of it. Both she and Greg think it's just my word against theirs." "You have proof?" Sandy asked, surprised. Claire made it sound like the affair was a brief mistake, that she regretted it, but you were unforgiving. "This wasn't just a fling. It went on for months," I said. "What I have is pretty damning. Nudity, graphic language, the works. I don't think you should see it." "Don't be ridiculous, Robert," Sandy said firmly. "I'm a grown woman. You've always been respectful around Bill and me. But trust me, I've heard and seen worse. I want to know the truth. I'm guessing from your tone that these files will paint my daughter in a very bad light, won't they?" I nodded, realizing I didn't want Claire painting me as just an unforgiving jerk over a minor mistake that spiraled out of control. "It's bad, Sandy. I really don't want to hurt you by showing it." "I told you. I want to see what you have," Sandy insisted, her voice firm. "Cheating pisses me off, whether it's you or Claire. I had plenty of chances to mess around on Bill over the years. Some were tempting, but I never did." I agreed to let her listen to the audio from my meeting with Claire and the other recordings I had. "Claire's going to need your support," I said. "She's facing a tough legal battle." Sandy nodded. "We'll support her, but that doesn't mean we'll excuse what she did," she replied. I mentioned I was moving out and that Claire could stay in the apartment, but Sandy said Claire would be living with them for now. Rachel insisted on it. Rachel went inside to pack some of Claire's clothes. "Damn, this is a mess," Rachel said as she came back out. "You only know part of it," I replied. "I was just 17 when you and Claire got together. I was dating a guy on the football team. Nothing serious, just hanging out. Mom always talked about how Claire hit the jackpot with you. She found a great guy who'd stick by her, just like Dad. You weren't the tallest or most handsome, but you were decent looking and attractive in your own way. Someone a girl could count on to love her. Smart and loyal." I laughed. "You're making me sound like a loyal dog." Rachel grinned. "You know what I mean. I got to know you and envied my sister. I dated guys hoping to find someone like you, but I never did." Rachel hugged me tightly. "I'm just going to say it. I've had feelings for you for a long time. If my sister's stupid enough to let you go, I want you. I've loved you for years, and I'm here for you." I didn't know how to react, so I hugged Rachel back and told her I appreciated her support. She smiled and kissed me on the cheek, sending a jolt through me. Something about the women in Claire's family always had that effect on me. I told Rachel that Claire didn't have to move out of the apartment, that I'd be staying at my family's cabin outside of town. Rachel shook her head. "Mom's furious that Claire ruined a good thing. She wants her back at home to give her a piece of her mind and to keep an eye on her." I offered to let Claire live with me, but Mom shut that down, Rachel said. "I'm just graduating, and Mom says I need to live my own life and deal with my own choices." She must have repeated that 100 times on the way over. John was helping me load the car, handling all the heavy lifting since the doctor had warned me about strenuous activity. My cast wasn't helping either. "I've got your number and I know where the cabin is," Rachel said with a playful grin. She leaned in and whispered, "Maybe soon you'll be ready for some fun." "Hey there," a voice called from behind. It was Cheryl, the neighbor from across the landing. "I see you're up and about." Then she noticed the boxes on the landing. "I hope you're not trying to carry any of those. You know you're supposed to take it easy. You had a pretty bad concussion." "How did you know how badly I was hurt and what my doctor's orders were?" I asked. I also wanted to thank you for helping me when I got hurt. I heard you were right there, checking on me. Cheryl tugged at the name tag on her scrubs. I work in critical care, right around the corner from where you were. I mainly handle cardiac cases, not neuro. But Greta, the nurse who took care of you, was my roommate in nursing school. I kept tabs on you. The doctor said I just had a little swelling, I replied. Yeah, that's like saying you had a little heart attack, Cheryl laughed. I looked at your chart, and we nurses share info on the unit. You had a significant injury. Just because they said 7 to 10 days, my advice is to take at least that long, if not longer. I knew she was a nurse, but hadn't realized the extent of her involvement. Claire and I had invited her over a few times, and she had shared bits of her life. I liked her. I assured her that John was doing all the carrying and that I was only packing my clothes. I thanked her again for saving my life. She shrugged, looking a bit embarrassed. Honestly, I was scared. I'm not a neurospecialist, but I've been trained. When I saw you lying there, I was afraid you'd broken your neck. Cervical injuries can stop breathing. If you had quit breathing, it would have been nearly impossible to do CPR in the position you were in. I just loosened your tie and opened your shirt to relieve pressure. Checking your eyes was about all I could do. I didn't have anything to stabilize your neck, so I couldn't move you. I was relieved you didn't wake up and start moving around, but the ambulance arrived pretty quickly. Do you still have the video you took? I asked. My mom took all the pictures and videos, but I kept copies, Cheryl said. She asked for my phone number so she could forward them to me. We watched the video together, and Rachel looked over my shoulder. Well, there's no doubt about what they were doing, Rachel said, smirking. Claire's going to lose it when she finds out you've seen her freshly caught in the act. Cheryl chuckled. I'm guessing you're Claire's sister. You look like her. We stood there for a moment before Cheryl hugged me, whispering in my ear, You've got my number now. Call me if you want to talk or anything else. Out loud, she said, Take care of yourself, Robert. Slow and steady. No rushing things. She turned and walked back to her apartment, and I couldn't help but notice a bit of extra sway in her step, though maybe it was just my imagination. John was amused as we drove away. Your mother-in-law would probably jump your bones if she were single, he joked. She's a classy lady, but she loves her husband and would never cheat. John glanced at me as we drove. So, now Claire's sister has a thing for you too? She'd jump into your bed in a heartbeat. All you have to do is let her. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. And that neighbor, Cheryl? The nurse? She's into you too. Don't you think so? John continued. I mean, wasn't I listening? Yeah, it's a bit messed up, but hey, you've got options, little brother, he laughed. We were halfway to the cabin, and all I could think about was making the divorce as smooth as possible. I wanted it over quickly. I had my lawyer offer Claire a deal. I'd cover half her rent and utilities if she stayed in the apartment alone. I'd even pay half her grocery bill, as long as it was for food she bought herself. No takeout or dining out. I'd keep her on my cell phone plan too. I offered this support for 2 years, giving her time to get back on her feet. Claire's lawyer crunched the numbers and quickly realized this was far more generous than what she'd get, based on the percentage of my income specified in the state guidelines. I knew her lawyer explained how much more restrictive things could be, so Claire accepted the terms and signed off. Of course, Claire had bigger concerns than our impending divorce. She was facing charges as an accessory for helping Greg in his attempted murder. She was released on her own recognizance, since she wasn't considered a flight risk. Greg, on the other hand, didn't fare as well. The attempted murder charge required a new bail to be set, and he needed to pay a percentage of it to the bondsman. Greg only had a little cash on hand. Gina had already taken her 70% of their liquid assets and locked down their investment accounts, so he couldn't touch that money. He didn't have the $100,000 to pay the bondsman's fee, and his lawyer was scrambling to secure a loan. With the community assets locked in divorce proceedings, he was struggling to use them as collateral. I couldn't help but laugh at the thought of Greg stewing in a jail cell. He considered himself a big shot, a mover and shaker, and now he was the one being moved and shaken. Gina was as vindictive as I was. I had told her about the supposed secret account in the Caribbean under their son's name, and she promised to check it out. To my surprise, the secret account really did exist. Gina's lawyer confirmed it, so she, her son, and the lawyer flew down to secure the money. Since the account was in their son's name, Greg had no legal claim to it. I would have loved to see Greg's face when he found out his hidden stash was gone. Even better, because the money was under their son's name, it wasn't considered community property. So Gina got away with it. To make matters worse for Greg, he'd soon be facing the IRS for not properly reporting the money as a gift to a minor. No matter who ended up paying the taxes, Greg would never see a dime of it. Gina later told me that her son had split the money evenly with his siblings, funding their college accounts. At least the Danvers kids were honest with each other. Justice is slow, though. My divorce from Claire was finalized months before her criminal trial. Her trial was tied to Greg's since she was accused of helping him cover up his role in my attack. Gina made sure Greg's resources were limited. He still had his 30% of their community assets, but it wasn't much. His real estate agents were on the verge of quitting due to his tarnished reputation. Gina got Greg to sign off on selling the franchise. She could have forced the issue, but his agreement sped things up. As part of the deal, he agreed not to start another brokerage within 50 miles for 5 years. I loved it. He was desperate for money to fund his defense, so he agreed. While we waited for the criminal trial, I jokingly suggested to Gina that we make a fake scandalous video just to mess with Greg and Claire. At first, she called me a sick bastard, but then she grinned and said, "You really want to stick it to them, don't you?" We laughed about it, but in the end, we decided against it. The week before Greg was supposed to get the money to make bail, Gina and I visited him. We spoke through a plexiglass window. Greg asked why I was there, and Gina simply said, "Because he deserves to be." She winked at Greg and smiled slyly. I held my index and middle fingers over my mouth, flicking my tongue suggestively, then suddenly made a crude gesture, pushing my index finger through the circle made by my thumb and other index finger. Greg's face turned bright red as he realized what I was implying. For a moment, I thought he'd explode in rage, but his reaction caught me off guard. He went absolutely berserk. I later found out that in jail, losing your temper is a big mistake. Greg picked up his chair and repeatedly smashed it against the plexiglass. He was immediately and painfully subdued by the guards. I heard later that Greg was placed in solitary confinement for 3 weeks. His bail was delayed and almost denied entirely because he was now considered a threat to both Gina and me. The guy really needed to learn how to keep his temper in check. During his trial, Greg spent half the time glaring at me instead of paying attention to the testimony. He should never have taken the stand, especially after I testified that he had threatened to kill me and had repeatedly called me a loser. When asked if he had ever threatened my life, Greg initially tried to play dumb, saying, "I don't remember saying that." But then, right there in court, he snapped and said, "But if I didn't say it before, I'm saying it now. I'd make sure of it." He then launched into a tirade, calling me a lying coward, a loser, and throwing in a few insults about my parents. I'll admit I had been subtly provoking him throughout the trial, repeating gestures I knew would push his buttons, like that crude hand signal. No one else seemed to notice, but it drove Greg over the edge. The calm demeanor he had been trying to maintain shattered, and his lawyer looked like he was ready to crawl under the table. The forensic evidence supported my story. Greg had attacked me, dragged me about 15 feet to the top of the stairs, and then deliberately shoved me down. His outburst in court, where he practically admitted he'd eliminate me if given the chance, didn't help his case at all. Greg's lawyer was decent, though. He tried to argue that Greg was justifiably angry, that his only real crime was sleeping with a married woman and defending himself from an enraged husband with a gun. The lawyer also claimed that Greg's current mental state was due to PTSD from his time in jail, which should be considered as a mitigating factor. In the end, the jury wasn't fully convinced, and Greg was sentenced to 10 years in prison instead of the 15 he could have gotten, even after his courtroom meltdown. Claire was called back to the stand to repeat her testimony. She claimed she never heard Greg threaten to kill me in the apartment, but during cross-examination, she admitted that Greg had once mentioned he might hire someone to take care of me. She was clearly shaken by Greg's outburst in court. Earlier, she had testified that Greg was the one who came up with the story, that he was merely visiting her, and that I had overreacted and attacked him. She admitted that my fall was no accident. It was a deliberate act on Greg's part. At her own trial, Claire stuck to her story, saying she was terrified at the time and genuinely thought I was dead after the fall. She confessed to going along with Greg's lie, hoping it would protect them both. In the end, she was sentenced to a year in the county jail, but the DA recommended a suspended sentence. The judge disagreed and ordered her to serve at least 3 months, considering her initial false statement to the police. Claire came to see me after she got out. She wanted to apologize for cheating on me. We hadn't spoken privately since our conversation at the cabin. I also want to thank you for not spreading the video you took when we talked, she said. It was humiliating enough that you gave Mom the audio. I was a fool to strip and beg like that, but I wanted to be your fool. Mom gave me a hard time about it, but she really tore into me for cheating on you and wrecking our marriage. Knowing what I did was bad enough, but she saw the video Cheryl's mom took. She told me if you weren't such a decent guy, you could have shown everyone that video and ruined our entire family's reputation. I knew she would, I said quietly. Is there any chance we could get back together? Claire asked hopefully. Maybe with counseling or a postnup. Well, I guess it would be a prenup now. I shook my head. A prenup didn't stop Greg. I'm not Greg, she replied, her voice cracking. I was stupid. I should have talked to you. Can we at least stay friends? We'll need to be if you're going to date my sister. Rachel told me she still wants to be with you. I've decided that's not going to happen, I said firmly. Claire left after wishing me well and hoping I'd forgive her someday. While I liked Rachel and the whole family, I knew it would never work out. It would only cause tension in the family eventually, and although I was still hurt by what Claire had done, I didn't want to bring more pain to her family. I couldn't help but wonder how Greg was handling life in prison. I laughed at the thought, betting he'd already gotten into a few fights. Gina told me she was planning to visit him with their boys. Since 2 of them were under 18, she had to accompany them. She joked about asking Greg if he was getting along with the other inmates, but in a way that would make sure the boys didn't hear. A few months later, I heard what had happened to Greg. He had been moved to a new unit after spending time in solitary, and it seemed his attitude hadn't improved. He was found unconscious in a shower stall, clearly beaten and humiliated. He had been kicked repeatedly in the groin, and most of his toiletries had been shoved up his rectum, a bar of soap, followed by his toothbrush and toothpaste. Worse, it was obvious that he had been sexually assaulted before that. I sent him a smiley face greeting card that read, "If you think I paid someone to do this, well, you're absolutely right." During my court hearings, I made a few friends who had connections in the jail system. They knew some inmates who could use a bit of extra cash for smokes, and I was more than happy to help them out. Although she tried calling me several times to change my mind, I never did date Rachel. She argued that her parents didn't mind and Claire was fine with us being together, but I knew it would eventually lead to problems. I cut off all contact, though I occasionally saw them around town. Claire moved to Shreveport and got a job as a sales rep for a small manufacturing company. I figured someone as attractive as her would soon have an active dating life again. As for me, I started dating Cheryl, the nurse from across the hall. She eventually moved in with me, and a year later, we got married and decided to start a family right away. Communication is crucial for us, and we share the same views on fidelity. I know I'll need to stay cautious when Greg gets out of prison, but part of me hopes he gets what's coming to him. Maybe I'll have to set aside some more cash for cigarettes. Okay, I admit it. I'm still a bit of a bastard, but only toward those who try to hurt me.